The eyes of the world were on Vietnam this week for the summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. Our CBS News colleagues were there covering the whole thing. It marked a return for the network. Many important events of the Vietnam War were covered by CBS News correspondents. Here's part of Bill Plante's report from 1965.
Landing craft brought most of the Marines through the choppy waves of the South China Sea into Da Nang Bay from the 7th Fleet offshore. 2 reinforced battalions were landed, a total of more than 3,500 men. They are the first actual ground combat troops to enter the country. All other American military men are technically classified as advisors. The Leathernecks swelled the number of American troops to over 27,000. They were combat ready as they landed, but there were no Viet Cong on the beach. Vietnamese troops had secured the area. Mission: security of the giant air base at Da Nang, the base from which airstrikes against the north are initiated, and the same base which has provided an easy target for the enemy on more than one occasion. The Marines were welcomed by Corps Commander General T, a powerful and respected figure on both the military and political scenes. As the Marines take up their defensive positions around the base, T's men will be freed for combat duty. Observers call the force of 3,500 men unusually large for security purposes alone, and there is speculation that their patrols will range a bit farther than might normally be the case.
And former CBS News correspondent Bill Plante joins me now. Bill, we are so thrilled to have you with us. Many people, of course, in Washington remember you as the CBS News senior White House correspondent, and we're going to get to your time covering the White House in just a moment. But others may not realize you actually did 4 tours as a CBS News correspondent covering the war in Vietnam. And as we saw in your piece there, you were there from when the first combat troops were on the ground to the evacuation of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon in 1975. Can you briefly reflect on your time covering that conflict?
Those years were very difficult for the country, and in many ways they formed everything about what's happening in the political situation since. The general distrust of government, for example. But the war itself started out to be a U.S. mission to preserve democracy in Asia, to help South Vietnam remain independent of the North, which wanted to bring it into its communist orbit. But what the North really wanted to do, of course, was reunify the country, and they eventually did. And the U.S. kept pouring troops into Vietnam, and over 4 different tours I saw that. It claimed that it was winning the war, and it turned out that we really weren't. They would announce various body casualty figures, people killed in action on the other side. And the numbers kept mounting up, but it didn't change anything. The other side kept fighting. So we began, those of us who reported on it, to distrust what the U.S. government was saying. And the seeds of that distrust grew into the general distrust of government today. And it was the casualties more than anything else, made even more evident by the television coverage of the war, that turned the American public against it. So it was a traumatic experience for the country.
So much symbolism when you talk about that conflict and that country of Vietnam. But Bill, I also want to ask you about an incident that happened with members of the media at the summit that we just saw took place in Hanoi. First, people should know, though, you have never been one to shy away from yelling questions at the president, any American president, whether or not it was at a news conference or any other setting where you may have been in the room or nearby. I want to play a quick exchange that you had with President Reagan. Let's listen to that.
Did you make a mistake in sending arms to Tehran, sir?
No, and I'm not taking any more questions.
All right. Remember that, Bill?
I do.
You know, this is the job of a reporter, is to ask elected officials questions, and they can be difficult questions. And I wonder, though, based on some of the reports that we are hearing, I want to get your thoughts on American officials who apparently barred some U.S. journalists from attending President Trump and Kim Jong-un's dinner. This was the second event, as I understand it, where reporters were allowed in. Something happened at that first event where apparently questions were asked by those wire service reporters about Michael Cohen, and then at that next event, that dinner, reporters were told, those wire reporters were told that they would not be allowed in. What do you make of that?
Well, you know what? I get it. The White House wants very much to avoid embarrassment, particularly with foreign leaders. And if the foreign press is barred, then the White House wants to make sure that the U.S. press doesn't ask questions. But that's not their job. And the job of the press is to ask the questions, and so we do. It is not protocol, but that's not the point. The point is to get an answer. I mean, I was told more than once not to ask a question asked in a foreign country, for example, Saudi Arabia, where the previous king was not supposed to be asked questions. I asked him one. He actually answered me, but nothing happened, as far as I know. And it's important. It's important to try to get the information that you're not going to get otherwise, to ask a question, to get an answer from someone who is otherwise unavailable. Kim Jong-un, the perfect example. And he answered a reporter's question, an American reporter's question, which is unheard of. So if the reporter had been successfully stopped from being there or asking the question, we wouldn't have that.
Right.
It's very important to be able to have access and to ask questions.
And that reporter was David Nakamura of the Washington Post. And I think some people, though, might be wondering, at these kinds of high-stakes meetings where you have so many geopolitical factors at stake, is there a different kind of protocol or level of standards that is sort of an unspoken agreement between the media and U.S. officials?
That's what the White House would like.
And in your case, in Saudi Arabia, you said you didn't adhere to that.
My belief is that there does not need to be, that we don't need to observe that. Now, I understand the White House argument, and it's an argument that you can make honestly, although I don't think this White House did. But still, I think it's more important to be able to be there and to be able to ask the question if you can.
So, Bill, before we let you go, next week will mark the 54th anniversary of Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama. Remind us about the significance of this day in the broader civil rights movement.
That was what happened on that day when John Lewis and a group of people marched across the bridge in Selma and confronted the Alabama National Guard and state troopers, and were driven back with tear gas clubs and men on horseback. That day marked the first time that the American public had seen on television the brutality of Southern law against black people trying to register. And it turned the American public very much against what was going on and in favor of the Voter Registration Act that Dr. King was trying so hard to get passed.
And so many of these issues continue to be with us today. Bill Plante, such a pleasure to have you with us. Bill, thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.